Hi guys, it's Mrs. Wallace. I'm just going to do a little video about the Byzantine Empire to cover some of the really main ideas and help you out with some of that long reading. If you can take a look at the map for a second, this gives you a sense of both Western Europe and Eastern Europe, or the Byzantine Empire. So if we look at Western Europe as being right here, here's the Kingdom of the Franks, where Charlemagne was in 800, so that would be Western Europe. Angles and the Saxons in England, this becomes a diverse society, but England also in Western Europe, and kind of place Italy and what ultimately becomes the Holy Roman Empire also in Western Europe. Remember, Spain is largely going to fall to the Islamic Empire, and so Northern Africa and Spain will largely be part of the Islamic Empire, which is different than what we're calling Western Europe and different than the Byzantine Empire. On this map, the Byzantine Empire is everything that is in the green here in the 500s. Now, the Byzantine Empire in later times will get smaller. In 527, all the way from here, all the way around the Mediterranean Sea, this is all the Byzantine Empire. Territories that do get added are here, and ultimately we know that the Byzantine Empire will lose some of the land over here, not too far in the 600s. They'll lose some of land to the Islamic Empire. They'll lose some land to the Franks. Okay, but kind of attach the Byzantine Empire to Greece, to modern-day Turkey, Syria, modern-day Israel, modern-day Egypt. This is kind of the area that we're talking about. And Constantinople, this major city that's kind of the headquarters of the government in Byzantine Empire, is right here. It's kind of the gateway between the Mediterranean Sea into the Black Sea. So its location is crucial. So a couple of things. Remember that both Western Europe and Eastern Europe, or the Byzantine Empire, were together in the Roman Empire. It was one large empire. The western half crumbled because of those Germanic invasions and also internal reasons, but Byzantine Empire really remains intact. So in the 300s, the 400s, the 500s, you have a large-scale Byzantine Empire that sees itself really as the remaining Roman Empire. The Eastern Byzantine Empire is largely Christian, just like Western Europe was, and it's largely Greek-speaking. So compared to Latin-speaking, there might be some Latin initially, but by the 600s and 700s, it's largely a Greek-speaking society. The Eastern half is containing different Christian sects. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And compared to Western Europe, even when the Roman Empire was intact, the eastern portion, or the Byzantine state, was much wealthier and much bigger. Very early on, there is a emperor who is tightly running the Byzantine state. So even after the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the Byzantine state survives with a very tightly ruled, highly exalted emperor. Justinian would be a great example of somebody who kind of fit that particular category. Some of the things that drive the way the Byzantines see their emperor is Caesaropapism. This is the idea that the emperor is kind of at the forefront and other things, including the church, are underneath the emperor. So the political leader, the secular political leader, kind of has oversight over the church. Think of the church in Byzantine Empire is kind of being seen as underneath, almost like a department of state, and therefore the emperor appoints people who are leaders in the church hierarchy. So they might be patriarchs or bishops or other Christian leaders. They would be individuals who are picked by the emperor. And emperors generally are dressing in purple and kind of very regal outfits. And an example of this is, of course, Justinian, who comes to power in 527. So this is, remember, hundreds of years prior to the reign of Charlemagne. So Justinian is before Charlemagne. Justinian is really not that much after the fall of the Roman Empire. And Byzantine is still intact. And what we have in this image is a representation of Justinian in the middle. He looks almost kind of divine. He has a crown, he has goods in his hand, he's got fancy socks, a halo. The Byzantines are often kind of making divinity very, very clear. So it's not necessarily that Justinian is a god or anything like that, but as emperor, he is kind of somebody significantly important. And flanking him are the other kind of roles in society. So maybe some politicians on his left and some warriors on his left and members of the church on his right, but he is very much center stage. Justinian, of course, comes to power in 527. He's an interesting guy because he really was born a peasant. It's through his uncle, who was high in the military, that Justinian comes into power. He was supposedly educated well, even though he always kind of held this like peasant quality about him. So he's kind of like maybe a little bit of like a new money kind of guy. When he becomes powerful, he ends up being, he's caught up in the aura of wanting to have power. It's something important to him. He does marry Theodora, who's famous kind of in her own right. She is a strong advisor, very strong woman, somebody who arguably was even she is known for being a circus dancer, a dancer with the bears. It's a little unclear. Some historians suggest she was a prostitute, but her background is a little sketchy before she becomes Justinian's wife. And the way that Theodora becomes significant is she ultimately will convince Justinian to pass certain types of laws that maybe are a little bit more favorable. And as a woman, she does kind of uphold a little bit of power. And there's, some times when Justinian will kind of cave to the public. He doesn't want to be emperor at one point. After a riot and the public wants to take him down, Theodora will kind of talk him out of it and say, I'm still going to be the empress. So she was kind of a strong woman. One of the things that Justinian does is he picks up on the old Roman codes of law and tweaks them a little bit, taking some of what works for Byzantine, and has a standardized civil law code. So it becomes a very centralized justice system. There's also a great deal of conquest. So Justinian's military gains are significant in the time period of the 500s. He actually tries to achieve gaining a little bit of Western Europe back. And there are some efforts in Italy, for example, the southern coast of Spain, a variety of places in North Africa. And Justinian does acquire these territories for Byzantine and makes Byzantine larger, but ultimately doesn't hold on to them for that long. It's expensive, and just kind of, costs and benefits, he ultimately decides it's too expensive. There are a great deal of threats on the Byzantines, and therefore a need to have a strong army. So something the Byzantines will look to do is centralize an army and have a strong army, not only for offensive conquests, but also so that they can kind of push back against groups of people, including the Seljuk Turks, including the Slavs who are in the Balkans, and ultimately after the threat of Islam in the 600s, we'll see that group of people threaten the Byzantine Empire. The political system is very much an imperial system. So there is an emperor. Things are run fairly top down. People who are within the government work for the emperor, and that is the kind of sole, direction where things come from. There's also something known as the theme system that starts a little bit after the reign of Justinian, and the theme system is organized for a couple different purposes. It helps to build the army and the military through recruitment of free peasants, but it also enables free peasants to continue to grow food on their land and ultimately sell that food for some type of economic gain. So the free peasantry system is something to research a little bit further, but it has a significant connection connection to prosperity and food surplus in the Byzantine Empire. There are a great deal of territorial losses in the 600s, and then there's also some territorial gains. A lot of what happens militarily, again, is done through a centralized military. So this is a map of the Byzantine Empire in 1000. So this is a few hundred years after the map in the beginning of this PowerPoint. Here is Constantinople. So you can kind of get a sense that this is still like the central city, kind of a very wealthy place and maybe the most important urban spot of the Byzantine Empire. Around 1000, you had places as far-flung as Hungary, maybe the bottom part of Italy and a little bit of modern-day Turkey. But by 1100, a good part of Turkey is gone. Area down here near Syria is gone. Southern Italy is gone. Hungary's gone. So there becomes this trend around 1100 or 1200 that the Byzantine Empire is just going to get progressively smaller as its neighbors essentially piece it up. While the Byzantine Empire is still thriving, one of the things that's ultimately thriving is the Byzantine economy. So a couple things to note. One, again, is kind of a little bit about that theme system and the role of free peasants, kind of compare this a little bit to some of the things going on in Western Europe. And the theme system thrives up until about the 11th century. So there's a point in early Byzantine history and kind of in the earlier part of the timeline that there is really significant prosperity as a result of the theme system. After some time, because of like income inequality and nobles that are taking more land, you end up with a great deal of challenges to the theme system, and it does collapse after the 1000s into the 1100s. The consequences of this, you're going to see lots of economic changes and lots of changes to the military. When the theme system ultimately does collapse, there's a lot of consequences. Peasants are going to be affected by that, and ultimately the military is very much affected by that because there's no longer this ability to recruit so easily from large groups of free peasants. Some things about industry and trade. Constantinople sits on like an intersection of multiple trade routes. So from the days of Rome, Constantinople never really stops being a center of trade. And just like today, societies that were able to trade charged a fee for the traded goods that came in and out of their society. So even if Byzantine wasn't producing things and selling things, which they were, they would still be making money off of the trade, off of other groups of people setting up shop and trading goods on their land. So those like kind of taxes that they collect on all of the traded goods end up making Byzantine very, very rich. There's also a currency. It says in this PowerPoint, the Solidus. There's also the Byzant, which is a really common coin that was eventually, kind of gained in Byzantine and used. So you had a mechanism for banking, a mechanism for currency exchange, and a mechanism for a variety of goods exchanges. So that is really important. This gives you a sense of Constantinople, and it is a packed city. It is kind of a peninsula of sorts. It is also very fortified. There's a great deal of effort that goes into the fortifications. If you're interested in that, check out the Building an Empire video clip. It tells you a little bit about the way that Constantinople was fortified. It was, designed to be a city that would be really difficult to attack. And also you can see some of the religious churches, the Hippodrome in here, and one of the churches that would be significant would of course be the Hagia Sophia, which Justinian builds. It's this kind of grand church, almost a big shout out not only for Christendom and the church and the religious aspect of things, but also to kind of show off a little bit of the wealth of his imperial court. And then lastly, a couple things about the urban life. Byzantine's urban centers were kind of where it was at, and you had a great deal of activity in the urban center, especially in Constantinople. You had active restaurants, shops, merchants on the corners, theater, art, lots of culture, lots of intellectual activity. It was a site of a great deal of education, debate, and also taverns and baths. So lots